Hey, welcome back to Scar Bears. This is Chris DT Gordon. I'm so happy that you're here with me today. I'm joined also by my new friend, Ben Eden. Ben, how are you today?
No, I'm so good. Glad to be here.
And I'm happy to have you here. Now, Ben, you and I are brethren of the new Podcaster Club. I believe you've been doing it for about 18 weeks. I heard you say at one time.
Correct.
Yeah, and I've been doing it for a couple months myself. And we're both also connected because our inspiration for our podcasts were born from a place of pain or discomfort. And as my listeners know, I am a survivor of necrotizing fasciitis, flesh eating bacteria. And I had gone through a pretty serious situation, had come out the other side a better person for it. But what is the inspiration for your podcast?
So mine comes from an emotional scar, or what I call emotional pain. Um, so where a lot of people have had an experience with a physical injury, which may turn into a physical scar. And it's interesting how different people talk about scars in different ways, right? I was even talking to a female friend of mine the other day about scars. And we were saying, yeah, the male gender generally likes to brag about their scar. And I said, yeah, this is what I did. And I was riding a dirt bike or whatever it was. And like, yeah, this is a cool scar. And then she was like, well, scars usually, taint my image. So I have to cover it with makeup. But anyway, what I've learned is that when people get a physical injury, it's obviously visible and people can see it. And then a lot of times they have the compassion and they say, oh, how are you? How did it happen? And then you get that little connection. The thing with an emotional injury is it's not visible and it's not as understood many times, right? I'm not putting down any physical injury because my goodness, those are painful. But the emotional side of it, like I was saying, is not visible. And because of that, and we don't understand it, when that injury first happens, many times we don't resolve it in the proper way. We don't know the doctor we should take that injury to. We don't know how to talk about it. We don't know how to express those emotions. So what happens is it turns into an emotional scar that sticks with us for years. And then 20 years later, in my case, it's still there affecting you. My goodness. And because it's still affecting you, then we have even more emotions like shame associated with the original event. So anyway, what I did with my podcast is I said, hey, if I went through a situation that gave me emotional pain and I started to react in certain ways, I wonder if anybody else has as well. I started talking to my young adult friends and they said, bro, we all experience this. The problem is nobody talks about it. So I said, hey, I will create a podcast to help people who can relate with my story and know that their feelings are valid. They're not alone in how they feel. Maybe they don't have to turn to those behaviors that they thought were solving the pain, when in reality, they're just short-term pleasures and certainly not helping in the long term. And that there's hope for them after all. That's the gist of the podcast.
Okay. And where did that emotional pain start?
So as I was becoming a speaker and a coach, I had this idea of emotional pain come to me. And I said, you really need to talk about that. I feel like I'm a God-fearing man. And I really felt like it was from God that, hey, this message of emotional pain needs to be shared. So then I was thinking about it. And I was like, well, I wonder if I have a story. I mean, do I have a story that makes me qualified to talk about emotional pain? And as I was pondering this idea, a memory came to me when I was 9 or 10 years old in elementary school. We had just finished PE. We played dodgeball that day. And I started to realize that I was good at sports. I'm naturally talented in most sports. And my friends were starting to notice that I was good at sports. And I was starting to care that they noticed, right? All sorts of cool things happening as a 9 or 10-year-old boy. As we were leaving the gym class, my friends were laughing hysterically about something. Of course, I wanted to be a part of it. So I said, hey guys, what's so funny? They turned to me and they said, raise your arms. So I did. And they laughed even harder. And I was like, what? So I looked down and I realized that I had extremely sweaty armpits.
Mm.
And you might think, well, you just finished a game of dodgeball, so of course you'd be sweaty. What's the big deal? Well, I was a 9 or 10-year-old boy, not knowing exactly how the body worked. And it must have been a lot worse than anybody else, because otherwise, why would my friends laugh about it? So being a 9 or 10-year-old boy, I all of a sudden experienced some very new and uncomfortable emotions. I felt humiliated, embarrassed, ashamed, scared, and overall uncomfortable. So what am I supposed to do as a 9 or 10-year-old boy? Well, I certainly can't talk to my friends anymore because they're the ones laughing at me. I don't want to talk to my mom because I don't want to relive those memories. I just hope it disappears. And therefore, that one event scarred me because I didn't deal with those emotions in the moment. And you might think, well, it was a one-time event. Great, 9 or 10 years old. You're a lot older than that. What's the big deal? Well, it turns out I have something called hyperhidrosis, which is excessive sweating. Some people have it in the hands, others in the feet, others in the underarms. And it's not something that we necessarily control. So it can and often does turn into a very embarrassing situation. My friends in that time, they reacted and they said, ew, that's disgusting, or ew, that's gross. Now, when they said that, and I felt those emotions, my brain started to think, I am gross, or I am disgusting. Therefore, there's something wrong with me. When those feelings and those thoughts start to come in your head and they're unresolved, then they start to attempt to define you a little bit. And they start to make me think, I'm not good enough. And if I'm not good enough, nobody will love me. So with all these thoughts and all these emotions in my mind, I went through life trying to have a normal life, quote unquote, right? So I couldn't just stay home and not be social, right? So when I went to these group activities, or if I tried out for a play, or if I was on a sports team, or if I was on a date at a dance, whatever normal life thing I was trying to do, I always had to try to hide this part of me. I didn't want anybody to discover that I had excessively sweaty armpits because I knew what would happen. People would laugh, I'd feel embarrassed, humiliated, this, that, and the other, and it wouldn't be cool. So I turned to what I've learned to call coping mechanisms. People call it all sorts of different things, a release, a way to feel better, whatever it is. But I turned to what I call a shield of success. I did my best to be great at everything I did, okay? In music, sports, school, work, church, friends, whatever. I tried to be extremely successful so that when people thought of Ben, they would think Ben is amazing. Ben is great. Ben's a leader. Ben's so cool, yada, yada. And I said, yes, I prefer that they think that of me instead of knowing something else. But here's the interesting thing. I was talking to a friend of mine and she said, Ben, you don't let anybody closer than arm's length. I said, yeah, you're right. Because if they do get any closer than that, they'll discover something about me that I don't control and that I'm not proud of. And then that deep human fear comes and it says, then if I'm not good enough, nobody will love me. And my shield of success gives me that feeling that people do love me because of all the great things I do, right? So also this shield of success it didn't resolve my emotions, it just shielded them, right? Those emotions were still there. So in times of loneliness or other times of stress, those emotions would come up and I would try to bury them in other ways. I even entered the world of addiction to try to see if that worked. But as most people know, if they've ever entered that world, those are only temporary pleasures that certainly don't help in the long term. And it just really adds to the self-loathing, okay? And those types of emotions. So my goodness, I went through all of these things and I started to think, well, what to do about it. Finally, a couple years ago, I was working with my therapist on a number of other things, but I thought, I wonder if I could tell him about my emotional pain and maybe he could help me through it. Now you have to remember, I had hidden this part of me for 20 years. Not even my mom knew how much this had affected me. So I went to my therapist ready for him to laugh and for me to feel all these embarrassing emotions. I went in very defensive. But I went in and I told him my story. And at the end, he said, thank you for telling me. And I'm like, what? You're not going to react in all the ways that my brain says you'll react? All my other friends did. So this was a first aha moment for my brain to say, wait a minute, maybe not everybody does react that way. Maybe there's a possibility that what I thought was true isn't true. Okay, interesting. Then my therapist helped me with something extremely important as far as the recovery and healing went. This is how you would heal an emotional part.
Mm.
He helped me go back to my 9 or 10-year-old self and imagine that I met my 9 or 10-year-old self right after this event happened. And I took myself to a safe place and I said, you just went through something extremely hard. And you have every right to feel the way that you do. But I want you to know that it is over, that you are loved, and that you're going to do some amazing things in life. Now, again, when I said this to myself, I said, baloney. How can any of that be true? I don't feel loved. My emotions say absolutely not. Why would anybody love me? And it's certainly not over. I still deal with it today. How can any of that be true? So I had this battle in my mind. But the therapist had me repeat this exercise a couple of times until my brain started to be reprogrammed and started to disassociate the memory from the emotions. And I started to believe, okay, I can be loved. I have done a lot of good things. It is over. That event was in the past. I don't need to relive it and relive it and relive it. Again, a principle that I've learned is that the brain can't tell the difference between something vividly imagined and something that is real. It seems the same to it. So if I'm reliving this event from 9 or 10 years old, that scar is being opened up, and all those emotions are being felt again. Here's another interesting thing that I learned. We can't selectively choose which emotions we feel. If we want to hide feelings like sadness and depression and anger and embarrassment, at the same time, we will hide or repress happiness, connection, and joy. How interesting is that? Here's an example. My therapist, he said, in the last 10 years, I want you to tell me some good memories that you've had. And this was prior to the exercise where I disassociated those feelings. I was like, well, I don't know if I have any good memories. You're like, well, how is that possible? And it had become another coping mechanism for me. If any part of my memory was bad, or I felt it was negative, whether it was a mistake or I just didn't like how it turned out, I would try to delete that memory. And at the same time, I would delete the good memories. Mm. But as I went through all this, like I said, I was able to finally experience the emotions that I had hidden for years. Yes, I cried. Yes, I was scared. Yes, I was embarrassed. But because it was in a safe environment with somebody who could help me through it, didn't judge me, helped me strengthen my logical side of the brain, I was finally able to leave those in the past. What used to be a ghost that haunted me is now an ancestor that I can learn from.
That's a great analogy. I really like that. And so moving forward, what are some ways that you've used this ancestor to better yourself and those with whom you connect and those whom you lead?
Sure. So again, it's how you see and how you associate things. So for example, I still have hyperhidrosis, right? It still affects me today. But instead of, anytime that possibility comes up, instead of having these horrible emotions come back up, I can think of, okay, that's an ancestor. It's still a part of me teaching me something. Instead of remembering all the horrible things, I can remember all the cool things that I've learned. And now I can help others with what I've learned. So everybody goes through emotions. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you find in your childhood. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But regardless, maybe something happens at work or with your relationships, with your friends. One of the books that I absolutely loved reading was How to Raise an Emotionally Intelligent Child. It talks about how things are stated and how things are received. A parent with every good intention has their child come home from school, and their child had just done a science project, okay? And their science project bombed, did not do very well. The parent, in its good intention, says, "Oh, it's fine. It's not a big deal. It's just one project. You'll be fine." Trying to care for them and trying to teach them that yes, this is part of life. You have to deal with things that don't always go your way, yada yada. But if the parent doesn't address the emotion, then what the child hears is your emotions aren't valid, how you feel isn't important. And now the child thinks, I'm different than my parents. I can't relate to my parents. I need to go find something else that helps me understand my emotions.
Mm.
And that explains a lot of disconnect. I'm like, wow, parents with all sorts of good intentions try this and it's not working. And I'm not here to say parents don't know what they're doing. They're doing their very best, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was just something interesting that I noticed. If we start with this kid in the science project and we say, my goodness, I bet you feel disappointed, don't you? I bet you feel sad, maybe a little nervous, or whatever the emotion might be. Then the kid says, yeah, I do. Now I know what to name my emotion, and I feel that my parent is an ally. They understand me. I can turn to them the next time I feel an emotion. Then there's the difference of what happened to me versus this child. And again, I'm not saying anything my parents did was wrong. I'm just saying if I had brought it to my parent and we had talked about it, then maybe this wouldn't have been such an emotional scar over these years because I would have had an ally. So this is something that I learned from this ancestor of mine to help others. Many people, simply because they haven't learned how to understand and acknowledge their emotions, they feel like the emotions have power over them as opposed to us having power over their emotions. Do you want me to keep going? I have lots I can say.
No, I was just really ruminating on what you were saying, and as you were speaking about the process that you took to realize how to use these emotions rather than to suppress them. I remember recently someone said that mental health is health.
Mm-hmm.
People, like you said earlier, people somehow have this stigma of mental health because or emotional health, that you can't see it. Well, it's just as important as physical health, because as you also stated, that if you're avoiding something because of a pain or a trauma, that takes you away from something else. And in your case, if you went down a different path and said, well, if I sweat so much while I work out, or play hard, I'm not gonna play hard anymore. Well, that could affect you physically because you're not going to get the exercise that you need.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really appreciate how much you are advocating for mental, I guess just the importance of mental health being addressed. That if you are sad, or if you're depressed, or if you feel that you need to talk to someone, talk to someone.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're right, we guys love to put on the armor.
Yeah.
And like you had said about physical scars, I could go all day talk about my physical scars.
Mm-hmm.
But those emotional scars are tough to get out of people. And
Yeah.
so I look on the screen and I see you have your website and your Facebook page and your Instagram page. How have you used your message to reach out to people and to share this important message of yours?
Well, mainly in the podcast is where they hear the details of the story, but otherwise just quotes or mini stories, some way to get it in people's minds that emotions are real, emotions are valid. You don't have to judge your emotions based on the invisible book of life that tells you how you should feel. Everybody is individual, and you simply need to understand and acknowledge your emotions, and that's okay. Here's one other thought that came to my mind when you were talking. With a physical injury, our body is designed to heal. Okay. So our body tells us a message. If it's hot, it's going to say, hey, that's hot. You don't want that. Or if you're hurt, it's going to say, hey, you're hurt. You need to heal. Okay. So it says, you need to pay attention to this area of your body because something's not right. Boom. It does the same thing with emotions. The problem is we don't always see that we're bleeding. We just feel something. We don't quite understand what it is. So that I was about to say trick, but it's a learned skill to see what the injury looks like, to understand what the name of the emotion is, because when we put a name to an emotion, we all of a sudden put a barrier on it, and now it's controllable instead of this invisible force that overwhelms us.
Mm.
And that's what I do in a lot of my posts is I say, here's how you do it. Here's what anger means. Here's what anger is telling you. Here's what sadness means. Here's what it's telling you. You're not a bad person for feeling angry. It doesn't mean you have to go kick a wall down or hurt somebody. It simply means that maybe you're not being heard, or maybe it's trying to teach you what's important. Or with sadness, maybe it's telling you that you need to slow down and you need to connect with somebody. If we can understand those, then we no longer feel bad about how we feel. We simply see it as a part of life and say, yes, my body is trying to tell me something. Let me slow down and listen to it, and then I'll feel okay about it. That saves us from more hurt of self-loathing, self-hate, and all that kind of stuff. That's what I try to teach in all of these posts, so that people can know that when they understand and acknowledge their emotions, they have power over them. It's a much better way of living. Another quote that I love is, the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your emotions.
Mm. Yeah, and I definitely agree with that, because your emotions are like, if you were to use a car analogy, or like the gas that powers your body. If you feel sad and you feel downtrodden, your body is going to react in that way. You may not want to work out. You may not want to talk with people and get and engage in those actions. And so, having control over your emotions, not only as children, as we try to teach our kids to not, act out because of anger or what have you, but as adults, especially, having emotional control is vitally important to be a productive member of society. And so I did see, Ben, that I guess recently you were part of a virtual conference or
Yes.
something of that nature. Please, I want to hear about that, how it went and everything.
Sure. It was called the Courageous Self Summit. It's a neat thing that I've really learned recently. Networking and meeting other people, connecting to other human beings is extremely valuable, not only for business, but for your emotional health, right? So I was reaching out to fellow speakers and I said, oh, it looks like we speak to the same kind of group, like young adults. We both have a passion for what we want to share. Getting into conferences a little bit more difficult because of the pandemic and everything going on. So why don't we create our own? What, right? And then another post that I made the other day is, you can do a lot. If you don't know, you can't.
I love that quote. I remember you had said it before, and when we talked previously, and I just really appreciate it. I want you to say that one more time, please.
You can do a lot. If you don't know, you can't.
I think a lot of people, they freeze when they realize, or they think that that they can't do something because they don't know all the steps.
Yeah.
But if they go out and try it, you never know. It resonates with me, especially because a few days ago, my family, and I went to see my brother and his family, and we taught my daughter how to water ski. And she was very hesitant at first. She's one of those kids that if she thinks that she will not do well at it, she won't do it. But finally, we said, it's the final day, sweetie. It's either this or you wait till next year. Well, of course, it was one of the waviest days that we were at the lake, but still, she got up on all skis. The first time she squatted the whole time, but she was above the water. And the next two times she stood up. But it's, if you don't know, you can't do it. Who knows, how far you'll go. So I love that quote.
Yeah. So in that conference, we talked a lot about courage, this idea of exactly what you're saying. And an example is, a lot of times we are afraid of doing something simply because of a lot of unknowns. But then because we feel that fear or that anxiety or whatever you want to call it, then we say, well, I can't do it and I'm immobilized. But there's always power to this. Our thoughts control our emotions. Therefore, we can control how we feel. And then we can do a lot of amazing, amazing things. With the summit, we had never done any of this. None of us had put on a conference. We didn't know if you had to wait 3 years to do it. No, we just said, we're going to do it. And we didn't know the technology. We had to upgrade a few things. We had to test a lot of things. We had no idea if anybody would show up. But we said that we feel good about it. We want to share a message. And if nobody shows up, then at least we got a good practice, right? So this idea of emotions and how this can apply to everybody. If I'm feeling nervous about doing something, anxious, okay, pause. Here's a cool experiment that I learned from one of my coaches. Pause and think, where am I feeling this emotion? And he did this with a person he was helping. Said, where do you feel anxious? And she said, well, down here in my stomach. Okay. Then he talked to her more about what she wanted to do. She wanted to be a public speaker, more comfortable with doing that in front of people because she really thought she had a message to share. And as they talked and got specific about what she wanted and how she felt about it, yada yada, she decided, actually, I'm kind of excited about being a public speaker. And he said, okay, I want you to tell me where you feel that in your body. And she says, well, it's in my stomach. Ah, the same place, huh? So really, if we can learn to strengthen our logical side of the brain and say, okay, I know where it's feeling or where the feeling is. Am I calling it the right thing? Because anxiety or fear or nervousness, very related to excitement. Our body is trying to tell us this is important. You want to do well, so prepare. It doesn't mean, it's too scary, you should never do it. It's just trying to give you some help. And if we do that, then we'll be a great speaker. We'll be a great person on the water. We'll be a great whatever we're trying to do.
That is so true. And again, you just hit on something that we addressed with another child of mine, my twin, my boy twin, to my daughter. He said, I'm really nervous. And I said, well, is it nervous scared or nervous excited? He goes, excited. And I said, well, then you're excited. You can say, I'm nervous, but I'm excited. And he said that and said that and said that. And then he got right up too. And
Huge.
so I do agree with you wholeheartedly that being able to specify what emotions you're feeling will help you control those thoughts.
Yep.
And so that's fantastic. Do you have any other conferences or big events coming up in the near future?
I will probably end up planning another conference. I don't know when or where, but
Okay.
I enjoyed it and we need to get the messages out. I'm speaking at some conference in Canada in next weekend.
Excellent.
This idea of if we can overcome our emotional barriers, then we can step into our purpose in the kingdom of God is the title of the one there. Excellent. And then great news, and it can be applicable to everybody. A lot of things that we do are marathons and not sprints. Sometimes we say, I'm going to work hard today, I'm going to get the result tomorrow. Sometimes that works, but many times it doesn't. So simply as I was consistent in posting on LinkedIn and all my social media, somebody reached out to me and asked me to speak in February. I'm like, excellent. Woohoo, that's exciting.
Very cool. And it might actually be a live event. You never know.
I know. That's the plan right now.
Well, cool. Well, fantastic. Well, I'm excited to learn about your escapades and your triumphs as the time goes on. And as people can see on the screen, you can be found at benedenspeaks.com and then facebook.com/group/champions of self and instagram.com/benedenspeaks. And so, Ben, as always, it's a great pleasure to talk with you. And I have one last question. My audience always wants to know, what is your favorite dinosaur?
Oh, great question. Mine is a Brachiosaurus.
Ooh, I have not received the Brachiosaurus yet. And why the Brachiosaurus?
Well, for those who don't know, that's the big long neck one, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's a huge animal, but it also seems to be docile. So at one time, it's just there to enjoy life and not make problems, but it's also powerful enough that if it needs to do something, not even the T-Rex will mess with it.
That is true. That is true. Well, thanks, Ben. I greatly appreciate your time. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye now. Hey, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Ben. If you want to learn more about what he's up to or get in contact with him, you can find him at benedenspeaks.com. That's his website. Or you could go to his Instagram account, Ben Eden Speaks, or his Facebook group called Champions of Self. He's also recently earned the title of Certified Virtual Speaker. So if you're looking for someone to talk with a group in a virtual sense, reach out to him, please. If you want to know more about what I'm up to, you can find me at chrisdtgordon.com. That's my website. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn at Chris DT Gordon. I hope you have a great day. Thanks as always for joining me, and pass on perfection and go for greatness.